morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are tuning in from, and welcome to Eval Cafe. My name is John Akwete. I am the organizer for Eval Cafe here at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University, and I'll be your host for today. Though we are all tuning in virtually, we would like to recognize that Western Michigan University is located on land historically occupied by Ijawi, Odawa, and Boduwami nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fire Confederacy and consider a sacred land of all indigenous people and their continuous presence, especially wherever you may be tuning in from. The Evaluation Cafe is a weekly series presented throughout the academic year that features guest speakers on a wide range of evaluation topics, as evident in all our presentations last semester, and has been taking place at the Evaluation Center since the early 1980s. Though this has traditionally been small in-person gathering that has been recorded and shared online continuously from last semester, this spring 2022 speaker series, while some may be hybrid, all will be open to the public to join online regardless of locations. For our third event this semester, we are delighted to be joined by our distinguished guest, David Keys. David is the founder and CEO of R for the Rest of Us. Before handing over to David, for those of us new to Eval Cafe, we typically have 30 to 40 minutes presentation or discussion, followed by a 15 to 20 minutes Q&A section. Like our previous event, David has requested our participants submit their questions in the chat box. At any point, you can pause throughout the presentation and feed to those questions. At this moment, I would like to invite David to share any pertinent information about himself and continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm gonna, John, can you, it says you have, the host has disabled screen sharing, so I'm gonna put my screen up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. Let me move you all over here. Pop out my chat. Great. All right. So my name is David. I will be talking about R today. I'm going to focus on one particular part of it, which I'll explain shortly. I'm delighted to be joining you. I'll tell you a bit about my background in just a moment, but before focusing exclusively on doing R-related things, actually came from the world of evaluation. So I always enjoy speaking to evaluators. Getting started, and I will put this, the link in the chat. If you all can help me by filling out a brief survey, that link that I just posted will actually redirect you to a Google form. And it is a very, very short, I promise you, I know survey fatigue is real, and I promise you this will take you approximately 60 seconds at the most. And it will just give me some data that I can use to show you some of the capabilities that R has. And great, I am actually looking on my screen, on my other screen over here, to make sure that that's working, and I can see that it is because I can see that there's some data coming in, which is great. So while you all are doing that, the other thing I'm going to say, is that the slides from today are available. They live online, and I just posted the link to them. You can download them. They'll be up there permanently. You can access them at any point. So let me just do one thing. Great. So just to give you a brief background on me, I'm kind of an unusual R user. So, people think of R as typically being, people who are statisticians, people who have a pretty hardcore quantitative background. I do not. I did a PhD program in anthropology, entirely qualitative. In my own dissertation research, I worked on some mixed methods things in grad school. But I didn't touch R. I worked with someone on that mixed methods project who used R. So that was my exposure to it. But again, I never actually did it. I never used it in my grad school program. It was really only after when I actually moved into evaluation and I was doing some work. The person I was working for at the time, Kavita Mitapali, an evaluator based outside of DC, said, David, I don't care what tool you use, I just need you to do the work. And I was primarily an Excel user, wanted to try something new. I had actually briefly taken an AEA workshop in 2015 on data viz with R and thought, you know what, I'd like to actually go back and try and do that. And I taught myself R, which I don't necessarily recommend. I'll talk a bit about that briefly. I definitely, in retrospect, made a lot of kind of wrong turns and going all sorts of directions. But I taught myself R and started using it in the work that I was doing with Kavita at the time. And then what I realized is, oh, you know what? There are actually a lot of people like me who, you know, are not super hardcore quants. I mean, if you are, I don't mean any disrespect to people like that, but if you are that, you probably have already been exposed to R. Whereas I realized there are a lot of people who, you know, do some quantitative work, especially in evaluation, who might want to learn R. And so I also have an education background. I used to be an elementary school teacher. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to combine these two things. And that's how R for the Rest of Us was born. Today, I use R primarily in a kind of funny, I mean, I say funny is probably not the right word, in an interesting way. I don't do any kind of inferential statistics with it. I only use it for descriptive statistics, for data visualization, and for reporting and kind of workflow stuff. And it's that last piece, the workflow and reporting, that I'm really going to focus on today, because I think in a lot of ways people don't think of, if you're new to R, you don't necessarily realize that R can help you in that respect. People think of it as a kind of like for like replacement for, you know, Excel or SPSS or SAS or whatever. And I think, you know, showing people the power that R has to improve your workflow is one of the things that I really enjoy doing the most. So today, I run R for the Rest of Us. I won't talk too much about my company, but just to give you a brief background, we do several things. We have courses. So these are the courses that we currently have on the website. The ones on the top row are just kind of like core if you want to learn R. And then the ones on the bottom row are topics, particular topics, things you might want to do with R. We also do training. So I work with organizations across the country, including, actually, there's one in Michigan. I have a call with them right after this, in fact. And then we do consulting work. And this is an example of a report that we worked on. This was entirely made within R, and I'll talk about this actually a bit more later on as we talk about the main topic for today. I only present those not as like, I don't want to get on here and just like try and sell you on R for the Rest of Us, but really to talk about some examples of kind of things you can do with R that people don't think about. And I think this type of reporting, again, having made this exclusively in R, is kind of a revelation to some people, realizing that, oh, I could actually just use R to do all of my work. So with that, let me kind of dive into the main topic, and let me do that actually with a question. How do you normally do your reporting? Kind of what are the steps involved in your reporting? And actually, I'd love to, I'm going to look on my other screen here, have folks just kind of put in the chat. And just to elaborate a bit, what I mean is basically like, what tools do you use when you are doing reporting in order to kind of put that report together? So I'm going to pause for a second and let folks post there. So I see an Excel and PowerPoint, RMarkdown, Excel, Tableau, Power BI, AWS QuickSight. I've never been exposed to that. Excel, PowerPoint, SPSS, sorry, before our Markdown, Excel, PowerPoint, Word, SPSS, Excel, Word. Great. Super. So I'm seeing, I mean, there's a range, right? But several different tools. And I'd say probably, at least for me, I can talk about kind of like what my path was, because I think it's actually fairly common. And based on what I'm seeing here, I think it is. So for a lot of people, doing reporting involves these kinds of steps. So you might gather data in something like, say, SurveyMonkey. You take that data, you get it into SPSS, you do your analysis there. Oh, wait, I'm just realizing I have a typo. I have the order wrong. Excel should actually be here. So let's say then you get your data from SPSS to Excel, you make your charts, you copy your charts then to Word, where you actually do the writing portion of it. Now, usually this works fine, but what happens, for example, if your data changes? You realize, oh my gosh, I got a new survey. Or what happens if you realize, okay, in the SPSS step, I made a mistake. Or what happens if you need to redo the report next year? Or what happens if you need to make reports for, you're doing a multi-site evaluation, you need to make reports for 100 schools, right? It can involve a lot of redoing of your work and a lot of manual work, including a lot of copying and pasting. I'm sure everyone has had that experience. I know I did before I switched to R, of doing something and realize, oh my gosh, I have to go all the way back from the last step, which again, should be Word, all the way back to this step of analyzing my data and then going back and making new graphs, copying them to Word. It's not only tedious, but it can also, I'd say, lead to mistakes, right? Like if we're being honest, it's that copying and pasting that can lead to a lot of errors. And if you need to make changes, it can feel like you're kind of having to reverse a river, right? Like that feeling of having to go back and redoing things is not great. There is a better way, I promise. And that better way is what I'm going to talk about. So to do that, I am actually going to switch over for just a second to, this is RStudio. And let me actually just do one thing. Let me clear all my output. So if you've never used R before, you're not going to know kind of, what I'm doing here. But I will explain it in just a second. Long story short, while it runs, because it's going to take just a minute or so to run, is I am actually generating a report. That survey that I had you do at the very beginning, I'm actually generating a report right now based on that data. So this is code that is generating that. And I'm going to walk through this and show you kind of exactly how this works in just a second. So let me just let the code finish running and then show you what I have made. Perfect. Okay. So let me bring this over here. All right, so I have something here. I have a report. Why R is Magic survey report. About our respondents, we did a survey on February 9th, 2022. We received responses from 24 people. The education levels are below. And you can see I have made a graph that shows we have 4 folks with bachelor's, 13 with master's, 7 with doctoral degrees. I have made a map that shows kind of where folks are located. So, we've got like 8-ish folks in Michigan, not surprisingly, assuming most folks are kind of in Western Michigan, someone in New York, Vermont, Knoxville, Lincoln, Nebraska, Pullman, Washington, some folks in California as well. And you can see that I also made graphs based on your responses. I did familiarity with R by education level. So this was on I even wrote here, on a 5-point scale, respondents listed their level of familiarity with R as 2.7. The figure below shows it broken down by education level. And so you can see the average familiarity by the education level. Actually, I'm not sure why the order got reversed here, but you can see I did the same thing basically then when it comes to interest in learning R. Can someone actually do me a favor while we are, while I'm talking about this for a second? Can someone actually just go fill it in again with, you could just make up some data, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. So let me actually bring this over here for just a second. I'll pull it back in just a minute. So what is this magic? Like, how is it that we are able to automatically generate a report based on data that literally came in like, what, 10 minutes ago? And the magic is a thing called RMarkdown. Let me talk about RMarkdown. Actually, let me show you the slides and then I'll actually go back into my RStudio. So if you think about, before I actually talk about RMarkdown, if you think about with the kind of process that I laid out before, so this you know, you have SurveyMonkey where you're gathering your data, SPSS to Excel, then to Word. If you think about basically with these three pieces, the SPSS, Excel, and Word, we can actually do all of these in one in RMarkdown, right? Like there are basically three different things that are happening here, primarily in this workflow. SPSS is used to do our data analysis. Excel, this is the way I use it at least, was used to make visualizations, and then Word was actually used to do the writing itself. So with RMarkdown, we actually combine all of these things. With RMarkdown, actually, let me go over here for a second. I'm just going to run this in the background. Great, it looks like there are, I think, a couple of others. Yeah, a couple others that came in. Okay, so with RMarkdown, we can actually combine all of those pieces in one tool. Now, I'm not going to obviously have time to like walk through all the details about how RMarkdown works, but let me just give you kind of a conceptual overview. What this does, what RMarkdown does, is it combines narrative text that you can write alongside code that does your analysis, pulling in your data, doing your visualizations. All of that stuff can happen with the code. So this, for example, if you see these, let me even zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. Anything that starts with that and ends with those three backticks that has that kind of gray background is code. And so, for example, here, what's happening is that it is importing our data and it's pulling it in directly from the Google Sheet. So I set up the Google form so it would pull in, the Google form would pipe to Google Sheets. Then the Google Sheet allows me to use this code here, which pulls the data directly in from Google Sheets and makes it possible for me to work with it in R. Next, for example, if you look here, this says about our respondents. Open this up. That gets converted into the header here. This is written in a thing called Markdown. So RMarkdown combines our code with a way of writing called Markdown, which is basically just a way, instead of if you write in Word, you know, if you want to make a header, you like select the text and then hit like first level header. With Markdown, you use some characters, special characters. In this case, you can see that #, makes this into a first level header when we do what's called knitting it or rendering it. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Then what I'm doing here, for example, is I'm calculating the number of responses. So this code, what it does is it based on the data that it pulled down from Google Sheets, counts how many responses we got today. And then it takes this and it just makes a pretty version of the date. So if I even actually, what I'm doing is I'm doing what's called running this code. So I'm going to run that. And I get a variable today pretty, which if I actually look over here, I can see it's February 9th, 2022. So then what I do is here, it says we did a survey on, and then it has this funny syntax here where it says, are today pretty? When I knit this, this gets converted, zoom in a little, I realize it's a little small, to this text. And so it replaces that with my variable for today's date. And the neat thing is, if I did this tomorrow and had people fill it out, I have it filtered. I have it set up so that it only would use the results from today, right? Same thing with the number of people who responded. I'm automatically calculating the number of responses, and I'm using that to fill in my text. So you can see how I'm combining just narrative text, right? Like I'm combining this, which is text, with code to make this dynamic and to make it so that I can at any point create a new report. If I come down to here, these are called code chunks. Let me bring this down here. Survey responses today. I basically do a bunch of work here. And let me just, I can kind of run this within RStudio here. You can see what I end up with is the education level graph that I made below. And you can see actually it automatically updated because the first time we did it, nobody had listed high school. I'm assuming some other people added that data. And so we have that listed here. Last thing I'm going to show here then with the locations. I have pulled in folks' locations here. So this pulls in their locations. And then this code here geocodes it. So in other words, it takes the data, finds the coordinates of it based on the city, state, and country you listed, and then it makes this interactive map. Okay. So that's how I can actually make this. And you'll notice that my report, and it is a report, but it's in HTML. You might be typically thinking of making reports in PDF or Word. One thing you can do with R is you can create reports in HTML, which allows you to do interactive things, which is pretty cool. I won't walk through all the details below, but it's basically the same process where I'm pulling in data on people's familiarity. You can see I have text here and that it automatically calculates their mean familiarity. And then again, makes a graph here. Okay. So I can kind of do this over and over and over, whenever I have new data to make my reports. Let me pull this over here. One thing. Okay, I'm just going to run a bit of code. Okay. So that's RMarkdown. So instead, just bring this up. Whoops, sorry, trying to do too many things. Instead of doing those multiple steps, the getting data, analyzing data, making charts, writing your report, you can do this in one tool in RMarkdown, and you can repeat that process whenever you want, which hopefully you can kind of get the idea that this can really improve your workflow. And this is why I think about this is why I titled my talk "Why R is Magic," because you don't have to wait till you get the data and you take the time to do your analysis. You can do it all whenever you want. You write your code in advance and then you can generate those reports. And I know as evaluation has kind of moved from in the past, it was all about summative reporting and giving reports at the end. As we try to provide feedback along the way, R can be a really powerful tool to enable you to do that in a way that is not overly onerous on you. So you can, just run your code, generate reports for clients or partner organizations, whoever you're working with, in a way that doesn't take up too much of your time. So in terms of benefits of RMarkdown, I really like this quote from Dana Wanzer that all the work is up front, and then for every session, you need to spend 15 minutes generating your report and sending it to your clients. That's exactly when I was doing more actual evaluation work, especially this was absolutely my experience. Other things you can do in RMarkdown, and this is a bit more advanced, but just to kind of show you what RMarkdown is capable of, you can create templates that then you can use to generate your reports. So what you're seeing here is a template that I, along with some folks at my organization at R for the Rest of Us, made for a client where they have a template for a report and they can create the report with RMarkdown. And whenever they export the report, it will look like this, and it will follow their organizational branding. So I'm going to put a link to in the chat to some information about that if you're curious. But this is possible with RMarkdown, as opposed to trying to tell people like, okay, use this template when you're working and then having to check it manually to make sure it all looks the same. You can automate that process so you never have to think about that kind of thing. You can also make multiple reports at once. So the report that I showed you previously, which I worked with some folks in Connecticut. This is a report on housing data in the state of Connecticut. The reason they came to us, to R for the Rest of Us, is they needed to make reports, one for each town in the state of Connecticut. There are 169 towns, and they also needed some for counties. So we ended up making around 170 of these reports. You can imagine if you're doing that in Excel, say manually, that's going to be a huge amount of work. With RMarkdown, there's a way to do this. It's called parameterized reporting. And you can, I've just put a link to a thing about parameterized reporting. You can make kind of one template and then say, okay, now create one report for each town in the state of Connecticut. Or if you're doing, working with schools, say each school, or imagine you're working in a school district and you want to produce reports for, thousands of students. You can absolutely do that. And it's just as simple as making one template and then running it across all of the organizations or individuals that you want to make reports for. You can also, with RMarkdown, make interactive reports. So for some reason, it's not actually working, but let me bring this over here and I'll put the link in the chat as well. This is a project where, along with a couple of my consultants, we made an interactive map on food resources for the Asian Pacific Islander community of San Francisco. This is entirely built within RMarkdown. It looks really similar, right, to the map that you saw before. We've, again, made within RMarkdown and then created an HTML document that lives now kind of as a website. You can do things on this, like see the Asian Pacific Islander population in any specific neighborhood in San Francisco. And then it shows, for example, the different food resources. You can filter to only see certain types, etc. So that's one of the other things that you can do with RMarkdown. You can also make presentations in RMarkdown. Actually, the slides that you're looking at, if it's not too meta, are actually made in RMarkdown. So we are right here in the slides, make presentations. Everything up above is what you saw before, and I created this in RMarkdown and then made it into the slides that you're seeing. You can also use, and this isn't RMarkdown specific, this is R. You can actually use R to send email. So let's say, for example, you make 170 reports and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to distribute these? Well, you can do that. You can automate the process of generating the reports and then sending the report to the right person who should receive it. Whoops, sorry. If you put in your email on the survey, if you check your email now, you'll actually have the report there. I sent it to you by email. I hope it worked. I've never actually done this before, so let me actually check my code and make sure. No, maybe that didn't work. Hold on, let me try that again. So I'm going to run my code and see if I can get this to run. All right, I'm going to leave this over here running while I finish talking. So I think overall kind of what I want to, oh, that didn't work. I'll send you the emails afterwards if I'm not sure that they went through. I think the overall thing I'd like to leave people with in terms of thinking about R is, I mean, I definitely believe it's magic, and mostly because I think R is really more than just a replacement for whatever current data analysis tool you're using. I know when I switched from Excel, I figured R would just do all the same things that Excel does, but in fact, it's done so much more than what I was able to do in Excel. It can do a lot more. And I think at its core, R is really about improving your workflow. So you know how I talked in the beginning about how I don't use R for any kind of complex statistics. For me, R is really about improving my workflow. And it's absolutely through a lot of the things that I showed today enabled me to do that. This is something actually I wrote a couple of years ago that no matter if you're doing complex statistical analysis or producing tables of descriptive stats, R can help you produce and share your results more efficiently than any other tool, at least than any other tool that I'm familiar with. Lastly, I just like to leave folks with this because I think it's something that's really nice to know about R. I really think the best reason to learn R is the community. So this is actually a tweet from 3 years ago, maybe, where someone wrote that they were thinking about learning R. And if you take a look at the responses, it's really amazing. Folks in the R community are well known for being incredibly supportive. And what that means is if you have questions, there are places you can go online and get really helpful responses. People are eager to help you, which you don't necessarily think about as like a benefit, but you know, you're going to run into those problems. They can be intimidating when you're learning to code in some languages where people are less than supportive. But in the R community, it's the exact opposite. So you can kind of know that you'll always get that feedback. Great, so I'm going to leave it there. It's my contact information, david@r4websites.com. I'm mostly active on Twitter, so you can find me there as well. And I will open it up for questions. I don't know how you all organize like providing or deciding who asks questions. John, do you want to do that or?
Yeah, the chat room is open, so if you have any question, or you can unmute yourself and ask directly at David.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and take the first one that I see, and I see someone has their hand up as well. Probably the easiest thing for me is if folks put it in the chat, but I'm also happy to have folks talk. So I see, I found it particularly difficult to change text, font of headers, subtitles, etc. within our Markdown documents. Any recommendations? Do I adjust this via the theme in the YAML header? Yeah, so this is, you know, getting a little bit more technical, but here, let me bring this over. So in the report, for example, where's the actual report? No, wait, sorry, what was the, oh wait, no, I just need to bring it up from here. Okay, so this report, for example, you can see I've changed the style on it. It uses the inter font, which is a font that I use for all or for the rest of us stuff. So the answer, Brad, no, sorry, it wasn't Brad. It was, oh yeah, it was. Brad, your question is about changing it. It depends what your output format is. Because I'm knitting to HTML, you use CSS to change your styles. So I made a CSS file here, very simple. It just brings in these fonts and then says, you know, in the body, apply the inter font, that color, and 1.25 line height. If you're knitting to other places, it depends on, if you're doing a Word, look up what's called Word reference documents. PDF is complicated because there are multiple ways to knit to PDF. If you email me, I can send you some resources. Brad, I see you have another question. Let me take a question from someone else, and then I'll come back. John, how long did it take for me to get reports done in R? This took my old workflow. It's hard to say because honestly, I do things in R that I didn't do, like the 170 report thing. I just never did that in my old workflow because I just wouldn't have even considered that. It's really hard to say. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say like R does have a reputation for being hard to learn, and I think in some ways it's well earned. But I think the main thing, and I didn't really talk about it that much here, but like once you get over that kind of initial learning curve, you'll very quickly be able to produce things much faster than you do in other tools. So I don't know exactly how to answer it, but I'll say I'm much more efficient now than I used to be. Jens, you said, I have a course on R for the rest of us, course on mapping. Any thoughts on the limitations of R versus traditional geographic information systems? Yeah, so I make a ton of maps in R. I'm going to open up actually a report. So whoops. So this is a report called Oregon by the Numbers. You can see, for example, it's got a bunch of maps, inset maps, maps showing kind of things in individual counties. And then later on in the report, there are a bunch of Choropleth maps. I think I mean, I'm not a GIS specialist, but I make a ton of maps in R, and I think it's, my understanding is it's pretty much as good as other tools. I posted a link to a really great book that also is free that you can, if you're interested in like going beyond, the course itself is focused on like, how do I make maps? But of course, there's a whole other world of GIS analysis that the course does not cover. This book, though, the link that I posted will get you into that if you're interested. Aisha, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I apologize if I'm not. Asked about the code. Yeah, let me get you the link. So I posted it all on GitHub, which is just a way to kind of share and collaborate on code. And you can see all the materials there. Sally asks, is GitHub a good repository for R code? Do our users post their code there? Yep, absolutely. Tons of our users there will post their code there. I mean, all of the, so I use an approach called the tidyverse, which is a kind of suite of packages. For example, all of the tidyverse packages, I'm looking at one called dplyr, are posted there. So this is the GitHub repository for dplyr. So yeah, people will post their code there. I actually, again, I don't really want to make this like overly salesy. I am putting together a course that'll be out probably later this spring on how to use Git and GitHub with R. I think it's well worth learning. I see someone has a question or is raising their hand.
Let me call.
Sure, that would be great because I can't actually see everybody. So
Oluwafemi, if you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. David, for a very wonderful presentation. And for me, though I've been able to clone your repo for why R is magic, but I'm still having an issue here with the report. In your line 48,
Yeah,
I could not get, I don't know, the Google credential. He said I can't get Google credential. That is the error I'm getting in the Markdown.
Yeah, so
where you have survey response today,
right,
for the survey we did today.
So it is set up. I didn't want to post people's information publicly because people are listing like their emails and that kind of thing. So unfortunately, you won't be able to run this code just because I didn't want to make it public. So that link only works for me. If you're interested in the kind of Google Sheet, there's a package called it's Google Sheets 4. You can check out the documentation for that to see how it works. But it's nice because it's really just like you run read sheet and then put in a URL that you have access to, and it will pull down the data directly from that. So I'm sorry I can't give you everything you need to run it, but hopefully that gives you a sense of how it would work.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. I'm going to actually take Brad. I saw you had another question about someone, if you know another language, confusion of learning a third style of coding. I don't know the best way to answer that because that's not true. I had done some HTML and CSS before, but R was the first real coding I had done. I haven't found it too confusing, at least. I mean, HTML and CSS are very different than R. There are some, I don't know what the other languages are, but there are some resources, for example, for like Python users coming to R, which is semi-common. I know R is semi-idiosyncratic. I don't know enough about other languages to know how, but I know people like talk about some of the strange elements of it. But I wouldn't worry about that as a problem. Randy asked if you can pull data from OneDrive sheets the same way as it does for Google. Hold on one second, I'm Googling 365. So I know there's an R package, which is, and I'm actually just, here, let me bring this over so you can see what I'm doing. There's an R package for working with Microsoft things. Yeah, so it looks like you can access things from OneDrive using this package. Here, I'll put this in the chat for you. I've never used it. It's just not the world that I work in, but I think this should work pretty well. And I think this is actually made by some folks at Microsoft. So I suspect it's going to be pretty good. Zach, you asked about, can I speak about R being an object-based language? You're reaching the limits of my knowledge of like computer science. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on R being an object-based language, Zach, not to put you on the spot. Okay, well, it's
way above my pay grade, but yeah, I think just, if there were any languages that also where you're writing code where you're creating objects that you're manipulating in either these strings or vectors or data frames, but I don't know if that's helpful for Brad in thinking through other languages that he's had experience with, at any rate.
Yeah. Brad, if you email me, if you tell me kind of what languages you're coming from, I might have some resources for you. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so I was really referring to, not specific computer programming languages, but actually from other stats programs. So,
okay.
I'm an old-time user of a program called Stata. I also know SPSS syntax very well. And I actually, between those two, I always found it sort of annoying when I moved from Stata to doing SPSS more, that a lot of things were similar, but not the same. And it actually almost becomes a hang up when you have certain functions that you can do and certain logic of syntax kind of, and then you get something that's slightly different. And I always think, gosh, is R going to be another one that just has all these slight differences that trip me up?
Yeah, I mean, I came from Excel, and I was doing all point and click. I wasn't doing any coding before, so I don't know that I have a great answer. If other folks on this call, I mean, I know there are like 30 something people. If anyone else has thoughts, I'd be curious.
So if you have any other questions, you can just put it in the chat box so that David can answer.
And while we're waiting, I checked my own email. I think the email actually made it to me. I don't know quite what happened with the code. I can check it, but I think folks should have received emails if you put your email in the box. Oh yeah, Jay, you're asking about RMarkdown reading Stata syntax. I think you're right. I know it reads Python. I'm not sure about other languages, but there's a push to make RMarkdown work with multiple languages, which still might be confusing actually, because you have to remember, okay, this part of my RMarkdown document is Stata, this part is R, but yeah, it's an option, I think.
I'll say something about switching over from SPSS syntax. And hi, David, it's nice to see you again.
Hey, Jason, good to see you.
So, I mean, I found it was not trivial to switch over to R code, and maybe you can comment on this. There's some packages that are meant to help you make that translation. And I tried playing with those and ended up it is better to just learn it like from the R methodology and not try to go line by line from what SPSS was doing to what R was doing. It's just like a different vocabulary. That was my experience. I found trying to use those packages that kind of make R act like SPSS for me wasn't very helpful.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I'll say I have a very strong opinion on with R is I really believe in using the tidyverse. Put a link here. It's just a collection of packages, and I think it makes R much easier to work with. Then there's also what's called base R. The tidyverse packages are designed to be user-friendly. For me, when I talked before about how my own learning path was really circuitous and I went down, some directions I probably shouldn't have gone down, that was, for me at least, was getting mixed up between base R and tidyverse. So if you're just starting out, I would highly recommend looking into the tidyverse packages. And they do, I mean, it's extremely rare that I have to do anything not using one of the tidyverse packages for my work. I love R, so I mean, which is really weird to say, and my wife still can't believe that I actually say that out loud. But if folks have questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk R. Eleanor said, resources related to overall competencies associated with R. Seems easy to find various courses on different skills. So you have recommendations to the overall framework for the core components to learn before diving in. Eleanor, can you maybe even unmute yourself and explain a little bit more kind of what you're asking?
Absolutely, yes. I just find that, and this may be a difference in how I learn, but that I appreciate bigger frameworks. I'm talking details, but at a bird's eye view to kind of say, Yeah, I just feel like in all my stats courses, I always learned like, okay, here's how you do this statistic, or here's an ANOVA class, or here, and it was always kind of like piecemeal, and eventually you see the big picture. And so, yeah, I just start better, more complicated than simple. But then I can go to the simple components once I see, like, I don't know, here are your frameworks for what to learn.
So, I mean, I think because I don't do any complex statistics with R, I'll say I work with a lot of people like you who took classes, for example, in grad school where they, learned how to run statistical tests in R. But what they don't have is that kind of like the fundamentals of how R works. I mean, I've tried to design the courses that I create to give people those fundamentals. Like I talk for the first paid course I have, which is called Fundamentals of R, it has a section on RMarkdown, it has a section on kind of data wrangling and analysis. And then it has a section on data visualization, and it tries to, like at a very high level, talk about how you do all of those things. I also see that Zach posted a book, R for Data Science. Oops. Oh, I have an autocompleter. R for Data Science. If you've had some exposure to R, I think this is a fantastic book. It's like the best book about R. But if you've never done anything with R, I find this book is can be a little off-putting. But if you've had some exposure, like it sounds like you may have, Eleanor, I think this is a great place to start. It's by Hadley Wickham, he and Garrett Grolman. They're the two of the folks behind the tidyverse. So it'll give you kind of an overview of R at a very basic level with a tidyverse approach, which I think is great.
No, you can't see me nodding my head, but this is all great.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect.
One last thing I'll post. I have also a resources page that I've collected. I actually need to update it, but you can, look for resources. Like, let's say I want to think about doing mapping in R. You can filter by mapping, and you can look, do you want to see like various packages for mapping? Or do you want to see learning resources, blog posts, that kind of thing for how to actually do mapping? So I've created this page to help folks find those resources. Can someone actually confirm if they got an email? Because I had an error, returned an error in my code, but I got the email. So I've never done that piece before of sending emails. So I'm curious. Oh, folks didn't. Okay, I'll check the email syntax. Looks like folks did not.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you for all your participation, and stay tuned for the upcoming. We'll be emailing the recording, the links to you, so you can either share with your colleagues. We have a YouTube account that we share our links in. So be sure to join us next week, where we'll be joined by Michael Quinn-Patton. He's the founder and director of Utilization Focused Evaluation, with Chiman Campbell. She's the director of Organizational Learning and Evaluation. They'll be presenting on new and emerging directions in utilization focused evaluation. So thank you for today's session. Have a nice day.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.